Hi, welcome to the Lorne Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lorne Epstein. Thank you for listening. Today, we are going to talk about technology in the workplace. We've done a few shows on technology in the workplace, but I've got some really special guests who have some amazing backgrounds. Before we get into that, I want to just kind of have you think about how has technology impacted your work life? If you're in your teens or your 20s, probably not much, because you're very fresh to the workplace and you're probably exactly where most companies want to be. But for those of us who are in our 40s and 50s, we've seen this incredible change over our careers of not having computers, having computers, then having the internet, and now all these iterations of interconnected technology, which have made a huge impact on our work lives. And particularly for folks who have gotten perhaps pushed out of their jobs because of technology. Like I knew people who used to set print for the newspapers. They had, they used to put the letters on and make that happen. And of course, that's gone. So let me introduce my guests. With me today in studio is Catherine Foster. Catherine is the Executive Director of Blockchain Labs for Open Collaborations and is an advisor to global startups, also the World Bank and many international programs. She was a diplomat on human security and international trade, including the NAFTA agreements, and business lead for Europe's Innovation and Entrepreneurship Innovation Program. Okay. Catherine is a driving force in the financial technology and blockchain community. Catherine, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very pleased to be here.
I met Catherine at a conference maybe 3 months ago on IT and HR. So how technology really affected HR. And there was a bunch of experts, and I've wanted to have Catherine on the show for a while, so welcome. And on the phone, I have with me Nicholas Wyman. And Nicholas is the CEO of IWSI Consulting, which is a global enterprise, and they are committed to workforce development. He spent the last 25 years doing consulting, writing, speaking, and helping organizations and individuals map a path to a more secure and prosperous future. And I love that he's looking to the future for us. He's the author of Job U and is a Winston Churchill Fellow. Nicholas, welcome to the show.
Great to be on.
So it's a huge topic, technology in the workplace, right? There's a million things we could talk about. But I thought we would start with kind of, what are some of the problems, right? What are some of the problems that, if you can imagine, many people are facing? Maybe not everyone, but many people are facing right now in the workplace. And Nicholas, why don't we start with you?
Well, it's a fairly broad subject, but I think that people are saying, what can I do to future-proof themselves in the workplace? And now, as over the last generations, it's critically important. And I think that's really being driven by the fact that half of existing jobs are likely to disappear in the next decade with automation and tech. And that so says Oxford University. And you need to sort of look into what that really means about, the jobs changing, but what are going to take their place. So that's the area that we really, need to think about and need to, really focus in on. But, the idea that, I suppose every other person you pass on the street today or this morning when you're out there is going to be affected by this tsunami of technological change.
Yeah, I love that word that you use, future-proof. So we've done a bunch of shows on this topic, and one of the things that colleges are doing now with kids is instead of kind of making them just one specialty, they're giving them this broad range of skills and making them flexible. So I like that. So I think we can start with that as the problem statement, is that people are unsure of what their future looks like in their work. So, I lead talent acquisition, right? Will one day that whole thing be taken over by bots? Catherine, what do you think?
I'm always concerned about this dystopian approach about what technology will do to our workforce, and I try to always focus on the more positive elements. I do believe that technology will displace certain elements of the way we work and who's doing this work, but I actually do think that it also offers certain opportunities to the workforce and to the way we work as well. And if you look at the current situation, already people are playing multiple roles. None of us is staying in any position for more than 3 years, 5 years. It's no longer that 40-year career track that we're talking about. The way that we're operating and doing work, I come from Europe where flexi time, being able to work from home, that's actually enabled by technology as well. So we have to look at the enabling factors that technology is offering us in the workforce. The fact that we don't have to cross borders. Immigration has been a big problem in the workforce, with 90% of people that have been displaced doing so voluntarily to find other workplaces. So I think there's many factors in the global workforce that we have to look at that are actually augmented by technology as well.
Yeah, we'll get to some of the solutions. I think that's a great point that we'll talk about how folks have been overcoming this. But I want to just kind of focus in on what folks might be thinking about is, where's my job going to be in 5 or 10 years? Right? Am I going to have this job? And then, well, what do I do about it? And is it good that we have that going on? Like, you talk about dystopian, and I think, a lot of us get programmed by movies where all of a sudden it's like everything's falling apart.
Yeah.
Right? But if you go back 40 years, which is not that long ago, this could be kind of a dystopian future where,
yes,
there is no job for kids out of college necessarily. That's, though it's not like we're eating rats, we're still struggling with those things. So what are some of the things you think that are impacting our economy in a negative way because of the technology that we have?
Absolutely. I think, negative impact, basically that the capacity of technology to take over certain tasks and roles that we do as individuals in our jobs. The fact that certain sectors can actually be displaced by technology. We talk a lot about blockchain revolutionizing the financial industry, but I actually look at it as an evolutionary element. It's not happening overnight. It is a progressive situation where, yes, things do start to come into the workplace in terms of our skills and capacities that are systematically being augmented or displaced by technology. So this is one area that I do agree that this is something that we have to prepare for. And it's not just young people that I think are having trouble in terms of job placement. It's also the people that aren't registered as unemployed, women over 40, women over 50 trying to get back into the workforce. So there's a whole diversity issue around this as well. And yes, I absolutely agree that certain sectors, the financial industry, media is a big one. The way that it's shifted has been quite dramatic. And we've seen this in Europe as well. And the way that we're approaching it has actually been very systematic too.
Nicholas, what could we tell the viewer, the listener rather, about, okay, if whatever you're doing, how could you figure out if your job is like going to go away or going to radically change? What would be the criteria? And let's talk about this for a minute. I'll start with Nicholas and then we'll come back to Catherine.
Well, I think that it really depends on the industry, the occupation. The first thing is don't read mainstream media. If you looked at some of the headlines that run around the US, there was a headline last year: "The robot that will take your job should pay taxes," says Bill Gates. Says Bill Gates. So, and that led to a discussion about universal-based income, and the position was that the robot tax could finance all these things in our society. So I think it's a particular set of skills and attributes, because we could have a panel of futurists on the program now, and I think they all might have differing opinions about what are the jobs of the future and how those jobs might look. So I think that one thing that you could do is look at a set of skills which you're able to take from job to job, look at some personal attributes. But picking up on a point earlier, I think that there is no question that skills, technology is driving skills upwards. So the lower skilled, the manually repetitious jobs, they're the jobs that are at most risk of automation. And they always have been if you go back, hundreds and hundreds of years. If you look at farming in the United States, where you had, 50% of the population was involved in farming, and now that's down to 2%. And that really was driven by automation. But I think that there's not a lot of people who are necessarily unhappy about that. A lot of these jobs are repetitious, dangerous. You look at the Fukushima reactor disaster. I mean, that really wasn't a place to send humans. A great place to send a robot. In the building construction industry, there's an opioid epidemic which is ripping apart the country. And one of the reasons for that is that, people's bodies are basically giving out in their mid-40s. Drywall plasterers who are lifting without mechanisation, without technology, lifting heavy objects above their heads, and that leads to all sorts of injuries, which then lead on to not all, but some of these addictions and challenges like that. So, bricklaying, another example of an industry where automation is taking place. Very hard to get people to want to be bricklayers, and there's now things called semi-automated masons. So my point is that skills are driving upwards. It's a high level of skills, but individuals really need to look and say, well, the industry I'm in, can it be replaced or will it be replaced by technology? And that's a whole discussion we could sort of open up. I think there are certain jobs that are going to require humanity that will never be replaced by technology or automation. They might be enhanced by.
Like what?
My dog, my short-haired pointer. I'm not going to take her off down to see a robot if she's unwell. I'll take her to a vet. I'll want her to go and see a human and have that human interaction. But I think where technology comes into veterinary science is going to be in the diagnosis, and it's the same with humans as well. I mean, I don't think it's ever going to get to the stage in medicine where you might look at particular type of diagnosis with X-ray screening, for instance. Robots, or when I say robots, technology is actually more accurate than human beings in identifying concerns, because humans are susceptible to things like fatigue and can miss things. But the question is, does that suddenly mean that radiotherapy technology jobs are all going to go away? And I think the answer is not. It just means that those jobs are going to adapt and use technology, to advance the outcomes.
Well, I know Catherine wants to add, so go ahead.
I just want to pick up on this because the way I've framed this, particularly in the program I was running in Europe, was let's look at the inefficiencies. To me, this is where technology is picking up.
I love that word, inefficiencies. Because to some person, inefficiencies is their job.
That's very true. But here, I mean, in terms of any of the sectors that you just discussed, basically what we're seeing is inefficiencies where technology is actually benefiting the workforce in a way. It's sort of shifting out those dangerous positions. It's shifting up the capacity to improve production, to improve health. So there are other elements of this. There's positive components. And the other positive element where we focus on is basically about addressing the opportunity gaps here. So where you do see problems in the way current workforce is run, the way agriculture happens, this was actually a big part of the position I had in Europe, was looking at inefficiencies in the agricultural production and issues about conservation. And being able to identify specific gaps in the technology or in the way that production happens, in the value chain, in the trading of this is where the technology is actually augmenting our capacities here. And what I see is instead a shift of the skill set that is needed. And that can actually happen at the individual basis of the workers involved, but it's also opening up a large element of entrepreneurship and innovation in this area. So I think this is what we're seeing overall in the landscape, is a shift towards entrepreneurial and innovation programming. So that's largely where I like to see a lot of the skill set training and skill set augmentation happening.
So, 30 years ago, if my mom had a part-time job as a travel agent, that would have been a really good paying job. She would have been able to work at her own pace. And now there relatively are no travel agents. And the consumer, myself, yourself, Nicholas on the phone, people who are listening, they book their own travel. They don't need a travel agent anymore. And so that whole thing, which I wouldn't have thought, like that's, they went there. They can tell you what it's like. They can make recommendations, has all been automated, right? So we don't even miss that service anymore. In fact, we're probably much more freed up. We don't have to go down to the travel agency store. We can do it all online. If I'm an accountant, right, and an accountant in this country, in America, there's always been a very stable, very secure, very kind of, you're going to have a job. And now with, offshoring to India, but also just the modernization of technology to be able to do kind of all of the hardcore accounting, then accountants' jobs are like kind of meaningless. So I wanted to just kind of really, and we're going to get to all the good stuff later, but I want to just talk about what people should be thinking.
I think one of the things there is we've now then got to go back and start delving in during the conversation to education.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the education systems are producing accountants with the traditional mindset, there's going to be some serious problems, and there are serious problems. I mean, remember the days where the accountants had this monopoly on tax returns. It was fantastic.
Right.
It was almost like this protected industry. And then along came things like TurboTax and all these other sort of applications. I think before TurboTax, actually. So there was the corner store. So there was like a retail like pharmacy on the corner where you could go and get your tax. And then the next generation is, forget about that. You can just do it, for most people who've got just a job, and it's quite a simple filing. They can use an application. But, what a lot of the accounting firms are finding is that they're still getting graduates who are being churned out of the academic institutions who are expecting, they actually think that there are these jobs. Accounting is one. Law is another. Yes, I go off to college. I get my law degree from a well-known institution, and I'm guaranteed a job for life. That misconception, particularly in some parts of the state, still exists. And I think what's really going on is that employers need to, take a very strong position back with the educational institutions and say, we need you to train for what's needed, not what's popular. Mm-hmm. And that really is disrupting the whole education system.
Totally, absolutely. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back and talk more about this. Hi, I'm Lorne Epstein, and you're listening to The Lorne Epstein Show, where we talk about jobs, careers, and the workplace, here on 96.7 FM. If you're interested in being on the show, you can give me a call at 240-876-0276 or email me at Lorne, Lorne, at electriccow.com. You can check out our Facebook page, which is Lorne Epstein, and also our Mixcloud account. So if you go to mixcloud.com, Lorne Epstein, you'll find our shows. Thanks so much. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Lorne Epstein. You're listening to The Lorne Epstein Show. Today with me, I have Catherine Foster and Nicholas Wyman, and we're talking about technology in the workplace. One of the things I wanted to say was, because one of the things I'm interested in is in hearing more from you guys about is if my job is low, very manual, if it's a very, very manual job, like you were saying about like construction or farming, it's more than likely will get absorbed by technology because of efficiencies, right? It is cheaper to have a machine build a house than it is to have a person build a house. And but also when we take a look at someone like accounting, how do we say that? Like, is it well, if it's particularly analytical in nature, that it can be replaced by a machine? And doctors, I just got an email from my workplace saying, hey, you don't have to go to your doctor. Call this number, and there'll be somebody on the other line who will give you some medical advice for these like 10 or 20 different things. So now I don't have to go to the doctor anymore. I'm making a phone call to some medical expert someplace, right? That's, again, creating efficiencies. But if it was a doctor's office, they would not get that business anymore. So it seems to me that it's kind of like a wild card as to what is going to be turned upside down.
I think we also have to remember that there's always going to be a human factor in these sectors. So I saw this article about blockchain potentially displacing the legal industry altogether, just as it was supposed to displace the financial industry. But what we see instead is those industries embracing the technology and training their workforce to actually work with them. Because even if you go to a online and self-diagnose using these techniques, that human factor is always going to be absolutely essential. Right. And so it's about that cross-training. And I think this comes back again into the education and training side of things. And what I think what we were doing in Europe and what I see happening here more and more, and what is absolutely essential, is cross-sectoral training. So not only are you going to get your engineering degree or your legal degree, but we're going to train you on entrepreneurship. We're going to train you on IT. You're going to have to take courses. I
definitely want to get to some of the solutions and what people are doing just a little bit later. But I love that because I know we've talked about that here, and you've got some good stuff here. Just to kind of hammer this out, what are folks concerned about in Europe regarding technology and job replacement? Like, what are they thinking, and how have jobs been replaced overseas?
I think I don't sense that same fear factor in Europe that I'm seeing in North America, to be honest. And I don't know what it's like in Australia. But what I'm seeing instead is the European Union and the public-private institutions actually working towards this in a cohesive way, sort of mapping out where the potential weak points are, where the potential risks are, and getting ahead of the game in a way. It doesn't mean it's working, but to full capacity, but it does mean that we actually already started after the Euro crisis, 2008, really starting hammering out what the workforce of the future will be like, what we should do to prepare for it. But these same questions are at the bottom of it. You know, the elements of the labor industry where displacement will happen, and manufacturing displacement will happen, financial industry displacement will happen, but where the opportunities be again.
Right, and that's so that we'll talk about the opportunities, but and we all know, like 100 years ago, most people were in the farms.
Yes.
Then the factories came along, and now people were in the cities working at the factories, and then. But like if we're optimizing, and I hate that word optimizing, but we're optimizing people to the point of less and less people are doing more and more work. What can you, Nicholas, talk about Australia or this in any other parts of the country that you like to, so we can kind of wrap that piece up?
No, like I think we've kind of covered the, I think that really is the main sort of thrust. I'd really like to sort of I just want to make sure that listeners aren't sitting there saying, well, this is it. There is a jobless future. I better tune out and just resolve myself to the fact that I'm not going to have an opportunity. There's some really interesting things going on around the world, and I think that people just have to maintain this positive and open outlook, and really do their research and don't believe everything you see on the internet. I mean, search engine optimization has been around for decades. And there are a lot of promoted stories out there, and people have a barrow to push. And so quite often, people are making decisions about their career and about future directions based on something they read, or particularly with young people, based on something their parents say. And there's a lot of people with strange ideas about, what the future of work might look like. Careers advisors in schools is another area. People need to get more information than just from one person in a school or a friend. So, that's probably what I wanted to say about that.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we're going to get to, hey, the world, the sky isn't falling, but the world is changing, and it's changing.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that we can all agree on is the world keeps changing, but it's changing at a much more rapid pace, where it's hard for someone like me to even get my head around all that's going on. I think there maybe was a time when we could all kind of get our head around of what's going on in the world. For me, that's been gone for a while. And so, I've been doing this talent acquisition business, and I'm personally concerned because they're talking about robots reading resumes. And I don't believe that it's actually going to happen, or it's going to be effective. But if companies go, well, yeah, let's try that out, and then that augments, like you're saying, we're talking about how technology could augment the worker, then maybe I don't need 100 recruiters, I only need 5. Like there was a financial institution, I forget which, that basically kind of dumped all of their high-paid investment analysts and then just kind of automated it. You know which one I'm talking about? Nick, did you hear about that?
No.
It was just recently, like in the last year. So they're getting rid of people and augmenting it with technology. But let's talk about what people can do, right? I love that word, future-proof. So Nicholas, you said it. So like, what are some of the fundamental? We talked about education, fundamental things that people should be thinking about regarding future-proofing their livelihood.
So I think we can get quite caught up in what I'd describe as the technical aspects of any job, and that is most definitely going to change. And so people need to constantly refresh and reboot and look towards training that might be available. And if you're already in a job, I mean, that could be something like through something like a professional certification or undertaking some occupational learning while you're still in a job, making sure that you're constantly refreshing and rebooting your skill sets through on-the-job training and online education. So I think that that most definitely is something that that people need to look towards. But then I think people have got to say, well, what are the other skills and attributes for today and tomorrow? What are some things that people can look at? And I always like the idea of looking to things just like quite simple things like people skills. I mean, I don't think that with humanity and as the human race that how can we develop interpersonal skills? And there's so many young people who are, coming into roles, coming into jobs that do have a very heavy technology focus. But at some stage, they still do need to interact with others. And I'm talking about things like, like curiosity and critical thinking. When I talk to employers about, taking on a person, I work a lot in youth employment. I actually employ about 750 people between the age of 19 and 25 through apprenticeships. And, when I'm out there, talking to people in our employment network, the managers and the supervisors are looking for people with a sense of curiosity and critical thinking. A positive outlook, as I mentioned before, things like resilience and an interest in lifelong learning. So these might sound a bit sort of up in the air, a bit sort of wishy-washy, but these really are things that, regardless of technological change, I think can carry people forward into new opportunities. As I said, while in parallel, looking at the technical skills of their particular occupation or industry.
Yeah, I think you're making a great point. I mean, just to encapsulate what you're saying is that we all need to learn. I think when I was a kid in school, I hated school. And it wasn't fun learning. It was kind of like this, it kind of turned me off to learning. And then after I got out of school, I really started to embrace learning and read and do and engage with more and more things. And I think kind of that's what you're talking about, is that we need to take charge. And I know your book, Job U, is kind of like, hey, you're responsible for your professional development. And now there's all these resources out there. Catherine, did you want to comment on this?
Absolutely. I think there are two elements here. One is this focus on we are training for a position, we are training for an industry. This has changed dramatically, right? We have new economy, we have new opportunities to create jobs ourselves as well. And so, yes, I do believe that we need to self-train. We need to continue augmenting our capacities. And it's not necessarily soft skills. I don't like that term. What I like to see is, do some design thinking. These are actually real skill sets that will be useful to you as an individual, no matter what industry you're going into. So the one element is, let's talk about the way work has changed. So a lot of people have a side hustle. A lot of people have their own business going, or they're doing the training to augment and bridge into another industry, or to make themselves more relevant with this new economy approaching us. So this is one element. The second element is, the actual skill sets and the way that we're undertaking education, traditional education, primary, high school, is where we really need to start shaking it up, and even universities. And this is an area where I really feel we have the capacity to shift that skill set and that capacity for people who are fortunate enough to go to university and those in high school and colleges. That cross-sectoral training is absolutely essential.
And there's a pressure now in colleges that when I went to college, pretty much you needed a college degree to get any job. And if you had a college degree, you could get lots of different jobs. Now that is not the case. No. And there's a pressure on colleges, like what is the return on investment for $150,000 or $200,000 college degree? And it's just not there.
Absolutely.
I mean, the bottom line is not it's not there.
And here again, this is where technology is benefiting us. We have actually so many fantastic online programs and educational opportunities. We've gotten away from the MOOC idea, the massive online courses, to actual specific skill set type courses.
So when you say MOOC, just explain what are massive online courses?
So these started, I would say, over a decade ago, where we had a lot of online courses, sort of the university approach being brought online so that people around the world could access these and take on those more traditional type of educational courses. Now we have more targeted training, interactive training. As technology shifts, so does our capacity to augment these courses. So they're no longer long, semester-long courses. They are actually very targeted, hour-long, 2-hour-long skill set courses. And then you can bridge those directly into the tasks that you're doing. So there's more interaction, there's more capacity to really make that relevant to what you're doing in your daily lives.
Yeah, MIT was one of the first big schools to release all of their coursework. You could take their classes. Career Builder, the website, has a program where, because they have access to the employers and they have access to the people, they partnered with Capella University. We had them on the show a while back. And they went to the employers and said, okay, what kind of people will you hire right now? And they said, we need these people with this skills and this training. So they went out to their population of millions of candidates, people who are looking for work, and they picked certain ones and they said, we will give you this free training. It takes a month or 2 months. If you do well in this training, you will get a job. And I think that's kind of where we're going. Like, a lot of people will take training, but why would I take the training if I don't know it's going to end up someplace? And I think Career Builder has kind of cracked the nut.
That's great.
The full talent pipeline of what's the need and how do we meet the need? And we haven't really. This is like an edge case, right? This Capella Career Builder thing is an edge case. But when we talk about what should schools do, it's really kind of theoretical in that I don't really know what job's going to be available for somebody who's in high school when they graduate college or in 4 or 5 or 6 years. But how do we become, I think that the thing, and I feel like this is where we're getting to, is we've got to iterate faster and faster and faster. And I don't know what the end point is on that, but I definitely know it's exhausting as all get out.
Sure. Could I chime in? I spent 2 decades at the light bulb. I didn't have a blinding flash of the obvious. Here I was employing people in this sort of early 20s demographic, trying to understand why we had this, this thing, the skills gap, which I'm sure the listeners are aware of, where you've got, people who don't match the available jobs. And so at a time where you've got, student debt topping out, I see in January this year, it's $1.48 trillion.
Yeah, I want to just one quick thing. Just
44 million borrowers, and so
Nicholas, I'm gonna let you continue. I just wanted to, because when we talk about the skills gap, I want to make sure the listeners are. So the skills gap is really a combination of things: people not having the right skills, but also a lot of people being in these culture bubbles where they don't know how to get those skills, and they don't know what skills they need to get in order to get a job. So the skills gap is that, but it's a broad, very broad thing. And we need to take a quick break. So as soon as we come back, Nicholas, I'm going to go right to you. Is that all right?
Sure.
Awesome. Hi, my name's Lorne Epstein, and every week at 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock on Mondays, I talk about jobs and careers and the workplace. We've done shows on pot in the workplace, the salary secrecy laws, and how to write a resume. I'm inviting you to come on our show. If you're interested or have show ideas, you can give me a call at 240-876-0276 or email me at Lorne, at electriccow.com. Or you can go to our webpage at lorneepstein.com or our Facebook page, which is also Lorne Epstein, and our Mixcloud account is, and you guessed it, Lorne Epstein at mixcloud.com. Hope to see you here on the show soon. If you want to sell more to HR and TA professionals, we can help you bring your brand into the ears of over 100,000 decision makers around the world. To advertise on this and other shows, contact us at lorne@lorneepstein.com. Welcome back to the Lorne Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lorne Epstein. With me today is Nicholas Wyman and Catherine Foster, and we're talking about technology in the workplace. Nicholas, back to you.
Yeah, well, I think so. We were just talking about the skills gap. I call it people without jobs, jobs without people. But even now, we've got over 3 million American jobs unfilled, and companies are still saying they can't find people with what they call the right skills. Meanwhile, in parallel, as I said, we've got student loan debt, 1.48 trillion, 44 million borrowers. To put that in perspective, that's like 600 billion more than credit card debt. So think of everyone out there, swiping credit cards at the mall today. I mean, that is huge. And so the average, I think the average 2016 debt was about $37,000. So there's a lot of anxiety out there, and I was saying before that it took me 2 decades to actually say I think that we really need to go back into the education systems. And so, I really started involving myself in this idea of, where can we start to have some more influence, and really go back and look at high school. And that's where a lot of things are going wrong. I mean, there really is, popular culture in America. It really has been college for all or college for everyone. This myopic focus that, you watch a movie, if anyone's, movie, or, you're looking at some sort of program these days, there's this sort of interweaved theme about all roads lead to college and college funds. And I think that some colleges, and we're talking 4-year colleges here, some colleges and universities are absolutely ahead of the wave. And you mentioned MIT before. There's so many that are now adapting to this change and looking at innovative ways to partner with organisations, partner with employers, partner with the communities. So I think this idea of partnerships in education is really starting to connect the dots where this skills gap has existed. So I mentioned that, there's this situation where you've had employers who are saying, we can't find people with the right skills. And that really is where the challenge is out to employers to not sit and wait for, graduates, as it were, to come and apply for their jobs. They actually need to get proactively involved in the education system and be a part of the voice, as opposed to, waiting for, dare I say it, waiting for government to solve this solution. That's going to be a long time.
I would absolutely agree with this, and this is the point I was making about where I see things starting to happen here. As you said, there are some institutions who are really advancing on that. The high school education system, the internship programs that we have seen being very successful is one avenue that we can explore even at the high school level. The club program that we have, where you actually have industry sponsors.
Can you give us an example of when you say the internship program, so that
Sure.
we have some context?
In Switzerland, we've had this long-standing internship program starting at the age of 16 or even earlier onwards, where students are actually encouraged and you basically have to take a term to a full year off to do on-site internship work programs. And it's not...
A job.
Yeah, a job with an industry, with an institution, with an NGO. You can go into any sector. And the partnerships are established through various ways, but it's largely...
government...
It's not necessarily government at the center of it. Government supports it, but this was seen as industry as a way of solving that gap, the skills gap, and also a way of staying very relevant to the demand side to the market, because this is also the people that they're bringing in as the potential skilled employees are also the markets going forward. So it really is a way to stay very relevant to the next generation, if you will, and to train them for the future, as well as be aware of the gaps that are coming in terms of the market and technology. So the Swiss institutions have been very, very successful there. And that would happen across Europe and even in Canada. In Canada, we had an internship program that was largely seen as people who would not make it to university. So it was very much, come and learn to be a mechanic or do drywall. But this is changing rapidly. It's seen as very much a necessity to get all of those other soft skills as well for the students and to stay relevant for the institutions. And then I also wanted to chime in on the public-private partnership, because I think what we're seeing, I agree, I think the North American university system and the debt is a burden that is just gone too far, that we're really seeing a need to change that culture and that financial burden. What we have seen programs developing with public-private partnerships is, lower tuition is one thing, but that's because you have industry-sponsored programs, automotive industry, agricultural industry, financial industry, all sort of partaking in the institutional learning.
So the interesting thing about that, because I'm on the recruiting side, is that most companies have gotten away from training people, and other than really, really big companies like General Motors, because it's too expensive and they're optimizing. Mm-hmm. They're like, well, why should we train someone and have them leave in a year or two when we can just take someone else's person who's already been trained? And that's the mindset, right? That's the business mindset. Mm. That's how we think. And so there has not been a willingness by most, like the majority of companies, to engage in this. Now, there is a program in D.C., Washington, D.C., where the government subsidized people getting education to get jobs. However, it was a really clear, defined job, and the government was willing to do it, and businesses are willing to, like, if the government pays, like, let's say 70 or 80% of their salary. And so now it's a much easier bite for a company to say, okay, sure, we'll have this person on, because that adds drag, right? When you're training someone, it adds drag to profitability. They're not going to be really turning out any revenue. So what's the argument that we tell Americans? Because now we're, at least I think getting to something is like, Nicholas, what do we tell most American businesses about getting on board with this? And I love that you've been doing apprenticeships about this.
Well, when the thing, there is a bit of a challenge in the US with the term apprenticeship. Yeah. And it's not as well recognised as it is in Europe and particularly in Switzerland, where there's one of the world leading models. Australia's got a very robust apprenticeship system, as does the UK. The problem with apprenticeship in the US is that it's been very much thought of as something that's really just for the building and construction industry. It really isn't relevant. So what's really important is to say, how can even something like apprenticeship be, adapted to meet, the American market and towards some of the, jobs of the future. And, one of the things that, really is important there is looking at the types of occupations that you can apprentice in. And, so talking of Switzerland, you can do an apprenticeship in banking and finance or in technology-related fields.
But let's talk about how that actually happens. So when you say it, does the government say, okay, we're going to pay, how is it actually, what's the schema? So I understand it and the listeners understand, how does that actually happen?
Well, if I wanted to, talk about, some people I know in Switzerland, and then how that might be different in Australia. So Sergio Amotti, who's the CEO of UBS, which I think is Switzerland's largest bank, I'm not sure, maybe, he left high school to get into an apprenticeship, and I think that he was about 15 or 16 years of age, which is a completely different mindset to how that might be in the US. And one of the things about an apprenticeship is that you can master skills and attributes on and off the job. And for someone like Sergio, he mastered early this art of communication, which he uses every day in leading this workforce, this global leader in banking and finance with a 60,000 strong workforce. So back to the US, I think there has been some resistance to the rollout of apprenticeship. And if I can give you just one sort of statistic, Australia has the same number of apprentices as the US does. But as you might know, Australia only has a population of just on 20 million people. So per 1,000 employees, there's a lot more apprentices in Australia. So the uptake has been slow.
But tell us about the program, because so people understand what does that mean? Is it that the government gives money?
No.
How does it actually work?
Are you talking in the context of how it works in the US, or how it would work in countries that have been doing it for many years?
Well, how is it working in Australia or Europe? So people understand, what would we have to do to do that?
I'll talk about Australia, and then we might sort of open the discussion a bit. So, in Australia, apprenticeship is across a broad range of occupations, and quite often a person does take on an apprenticeship while still in high school. So, when they're in 11th grade, they might be doing a day a week in the workplace, and really understanding if that's the occupational pathway they want to take on. When they graduate high school, they would then go into an on and off the job training experience, but the key part to that is that you're actually earning an income while learning. In the US, there's been some people who say, well, an apprenticeship is an internship. Not exactly. It's got to do with the duration. An apprenticeship in Australia, the minimum apprenticeship would be 12 to 18 months. And that would go through to potentially 5 to 6 years. What's an example of a 6-year apprenticeship? Aeronautical engineering. And I think in aerospace, we're all very happy. Maybe the apprenticeship should be 8 years. I mean, we really want to make sure that that people are well on top of how to service modern aircraft. But so a person goes off to an employer who has a skills need. There's a structured training program where you would have a training provider. In Australia, it's called TAFE. So in the US, it would be a community college. The person is working on the job, learning a set of skills in a real workplace. If we take that to the US...
Well, no, hang on, because you haven't answered my question. Who pays?
So in Australia, it's actually an employer-led model. So the employer is paying the wages of the apprentice because they're actually getting some productivity. And it's got to do with how the training is actually sequenced. So if we looked at, say, the automotive service industry, I'm not talking manufacturing, if you're an automotive technician working at the local Nissan dealer, the idea is that within the first 3 months of training, you would have learnt at the community college how to undertake something like an oil change. So you are actually productive because your employer can actually on-charge you to a client for changing the oil in the car. So for an employer, they're building a labour pipeline and investing in their future. But the person is also getting paid. So it's an entry-level position. I like to call it a training wage. Then, of course, it really has to do with who pays for the training. And that's one of the reasons that apprenticeship has been slow to take hold across the US.
Well, let's get Catherine wants to share something. Yeah. We're kind of running out of time, but go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, just from the Swiss perspective, so I see that happening in a two-pronged approach. So basically it did start decades ago, the apprenticeship program, as you say, and it was industry paid. But it was augmented through the collaboration and cooperation with the cantonal school system. So each state school system.
What's cantonal?
Canton is a state. So the state school system, as well as the actual high schools themselves. covering a lot of the administrative elements of the selection process. So the budget comes from the industry, and in Switzerland, it's gone from the banking industry across the board. You can do restaurant management, you can do fashion, any sector that wants to participate is able to do so. And the budget, yes, it comes from the training budget in terms of potential workforce.
From the state?
No, from the industry. It can be augmented from the state, but also what we're seeing is industries coming and partnering on sectoral innovation. So you have actually now the next stage along from apprenticeships where the students actually you have a selection of different processes. You can go for a day a week, but in Switzerland it's largely a term or a year or a summer program or all of the above. So you actually have a time frame differential as well. So you actually get really concrete job satisfaction.
So a company has to be willing to say, we're going to have a budget for apprenticeships or internships. We're going to set aside a pool of money. We're going to set people into that position to make sure this all happens. And that's basically what we're talking about.
Exactly, except in some cases it can be augmented by the employment agencies or the government officials. So you actually have that public-private partner.
Right.
Not always, but it can happen that way.
Yeah.
And I think that's the flexibility of it, is who actually sees a benefit here. Who's benefiting, right? Are we future-proofing the agencies that cover for unemployment wages and whatnot? Yes, so they could actually be a partner in this. So it's about the partnership approach.
Right.
Now, what we're also seeing is then companies taking from their sort of community and corporate sustainability budget and CSR, social responsibility, to actually sponsor clubs and innovation and entrepreneurship clubs in the high schools and universities. And this is something that we established as well, was an association for student innovation, where they learned specific skill sets and where they actually served as a service to the companies. So being able to say, right, you want to hack a problem, you want to find new innovations for your company, come in, we'll walk you through that. So we're actually seeing the next stage of that internship and entrepreneurship approach coming back to service the community in terms of the skill set.
So I think I told you guys in the beginning of the show that it was going to go so quickly that at the end you'll be like, that's it? Well, we're just about out of time. And so I wanted to, Catherine, if you'd like to just kind of, any final thoughts, and how can people reach you?
Well, they can reach me through LinkedIn, Catherine A. Foster. I'm there. And final thought would just be, I don't have this negative dystopian view of the future. I do see a very, very different cultural, economic context here in America, but I do see also some bridges being laid.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming. And Nicholas, thank you for being on the phone. Any final thoughts, and how can folks reach you?
Twitter's a good way to get me, at Nicholas_Wyman. And I really just wanted to say that, knowledge and practical skills are the way forward.
Absolutely. I think both of you added a lot of content to the show as far as helping people get a sense of where we really need to point ourselves. And I think, and I appreciate that we kind of ended up with training, education, and then the concept, the schema of apprenticeships and internships, where folks can get onto a path where they're actually going to get a job and be employable, and something that's needed. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next week here. I'm your host, Lorne Epstein, and you've been listening to The Lorne Epstein Show on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia.